All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live right here, right now, across the streams. We are on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. It's myself, Josh Egan, and we're joined by the man right here, Arthur Staple, covers the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers. Lots of questions to fly his way, but before we do, how's it going tonight, Arthur?
It's good, guys. How are you?
Doing great, actually. You know what? We're not buried in snow like Toronto is, like my co-host.
Oh, we're snowed in over here.
That's probably a good thing, man.
We're not doing too well. So before we jumped on, I mentioned you got the Quebec Nordiques hat on. Obviously, you want to appeal to the Canadian audience. To anybody who doesn't know who you are, just let them know right quick before we jump into this.
Well, I've been at The Athletic for about almost 4 years now, doing the Islanders within the last couple months. Mostly switched over to doing Rangers. My title's New York hockey columnist, but for the time being, I'm mostly Rangers. Obviously, I covered the Islanders for the last 12 years, including my time at Newsday, we're a daily newspaper in our area down here. So pretty familiar with both teams, and it's kind of been a fun transition to get to cover another team. And I covered the Rangers a long time ago, kind of in the pre-full year lockout, Eric Lindros, Theo Fleury era. So it's a very different environment around the team these days, 2 decades later.
Well, they're on the upswing now, too. So, I mean, there's lots to look forward to if you're covering the New York Rangers. I want to ask you a question, obviously, covering the New York Islanders. Let's get into this. Let's have a little fun right off the top. The John Tavares situation, when he left, did anybody really have a feeling he was going to leave? Was it disingenuous on his part? Because if you ask any Islanders fans to a T, they will tell you that he said he was not leaving, he was staying. I mean, you watch the Dear John videos go out and all those different things, and then the snakes thrown on the ice when he came back. For you, on your side of it, did you see it that way, or did you see him just ultimately make a decision and it came right down to the wire between the Leafs and the Islanders?
You know, it's easy now with all the years gone by. I think the kind of the myth of him rejecting them out of hand, saying he didn't want to be traded, which I think was true at the time. I think he's the kind of guy that what's right in front of him is the most important thing. And obviously, you have to think about your future when you're a guy who's coming into a contract situation like he was. And the way that the team was kind of spiraling out of control that year. They had a bad season the year before, and they rallied when they changed coaches from Jack Capuano to Doug Waite. They nearly made the playoffs. They nearly leapfrogged the Leafs, I think, in 2017 to make it, missed by a point. And then they go into the next season, and Doug Waite, who's very close with Tavares. Tavares lived with him when they were both playing in Tavares' first couple of years. So this is a guy that I think Tavares wanted to have as coach. The new owners who had just taken over, I think, were considering making some changes. They stayed with it because they thought it would appeal to Tavares and have him want to stay. And just that season kind of just slowly drained away, and then it kind of went from slow to quick, and they were really out of it by the end. You can't just say on Sunday I feel great, and on Monday I'm going to still feel great if the team is doing terribly, if things have changed. You have to adapt, and I think that part is understandable for him. But I think, as they went into that off season, during the season, I would have said I was pretty confident that he was going to stay. Loyalty seemed to be a big thing that was important to him. And I think he had a situation on the island where the new owners really wanted to cater to him. They were keeping him and his agent apprised of every situation, whether it was the new arena that had just been announced that season that they're playing in now this year, that he's going to get to see, that he's just saw for the first time not long ago. So there were a lot of things that they were trying to appeal to him. And I think ultimately when he got into a situation of sitting in his in his agent's office out in LA, hearing the offers from the teams, talking it over with his agent, talking it over with his wife, with his family, there was a lot of strong pull to come back and be kind of the conquering hero for a Leafs team that just hasn't had much success pretty much over his entire lifetime. So, it was an emotional time, and he's not a very emotional guy. So I think that really weighed on him too. And you can, I think if you ask individual Islander fans, you get the vitriol out of the way. They understand as a person what the decision that he made, but obviously as a fan of a team in the Islanders that has been, kind of a laughing stock for a lot of years. They obviously had huge success in the 80s and some ownership follies, a fraud, a kind of con man trying to buy them back in the 90s. change in uniforms to those ridiculous fish stick uniforms, terrible attendance throughout the years. And here are the Leafs, even without any success, the Leafs are the Leafs. They're kind of the kings of the NHL. They have a lot of attention. They get a lot of attention online. They have a lot of attention in the North American media. So it's just a feeling. I think that Islander fans have had a lot. The ones that have stuck with the team over the last couple decades of we're second fiddle, and here's a guy who came to us and he was going to be our savior, and he did lift them up from a team that was pretty terrible when he came to them in 2009, and they went to the playoffs a few times. He helped them win a round for the first time in 23 years. They thought they were finally on the upswing, and things took a couple of bumps in the road. The detour to Brooklyn didn't help with an arena that nobody liked. And they thought, okay, well, here's our guy that can stick with us. And then, he ultimately made that decision that was the right one for him, but it wasn't the right one for Islander fans. So here's where we are with a passionate fan base that's never going to get over it. And it's going to be, John Tavares is going to be long retired before he finally gets welcomed with open arms at UBS Arena. And I think we're all just going to have to live with it.
Yeah, so that would be my follow-up question. Like, what percentage of Islanders fans actually hate his guts? Because we always see like these loud minorities. Is it a minority that hates a minority of the fans that hate John Tavares, or is it just everybody there? We don't want him back. We don't need him. Because obviously when he went back the first time, there was toy snakes thrown on the ice. The "we don't need you" chants. That video was put out that I think we still are kind of questioning the intent behind that one. But that was entertaining. And then and also another question add on to it: did the 47 goals in his first year with the Leafs not really help that departure for Islanders fans?
The thing that would have that to me would have helped the most is the attitude the team took, which, they made all those changes that same offseason. Lou Lamoriello comes in, Barry Trotz comes in, Tavares leaves, and I think a lot of the players were feeling a little bit stung, even though they were excited by the prospect of having a championship general manager and a championship coach. And I think Barry Trotz kind of took that sentiment and ran with it. Really embraced the idea that okay, your captain and your best player turned you guys down. You're stung, but you use it and show everybody that he was wrong. And I think the success that they had in that first season, and certainly the success that they had in the last couple seasons, getting to within a couple games of the finals, should take the sting away. And it certainly did for the players. I don't think, there's lots of guys that are very tight with Tavares still. They played with him for a long time. So I don't think there's any unhappiness there. But, I don't know that the success part of what Tavares has done really matters much. I think that first game was just a, kind of a catharsis for Islander fans. It was all those feelings that they had from the summer. Here they could finally let them out on him. And I'm sure it affected him. His wife was at that game. He probably felt a little shell-shocked by the reaction, because I think he was so wrapped up in the decision that he made that I don't think he really understood what it meant to the fan base. And that's perfectly fine. It's not really his job, but you have to accept that there's going to be some hurt feelings. They all came out that night. I think even this season when they went back, there was some boos, and it's going to be consistent like that, but it's not anything like it was. If it was a playoff series, I think we could probably get it back up to a really high level of hate, but that's just the nature of playoffs, and there's already some bad blood between those two organizations from Islander fans that remember the 2002 playoffs, which was one of the most vicious series. I think that certainly for a first round that's been had in the last 30 years in the NHL. Lots of guys that played in that series and lots of fans who were there remember it very vividly. So there's just a little bit of funny history between the two organizations, and I think that kind of played a little bit of a role. And I think if you ask Islander fans that can take more of a big picture view, they appreciate what he did here for a decade, and he did bring them out of a certain darkness and into the light. And I think a lot of the guys that played with him and understood what he was about and appreciated his work ethic and his singular focus and learned a lot from it have benefited from him being here, because those guys are pretty much still here and have been the ones leading the charge to this team being a lot better and since he left. So I think you can understand some of the hard feelings, but also I think there's got to be some appreciation in there somewhere, because the fans loved him so much for so long. Like I said, it won't happen while he's playing, but hopefully at some point when he's retired, he can come back and they'll cheer for him, and it'll all be over with.
I think that'll be a long ways off for that to happen, obviously.
Probably.
But no, I liken it to Leafs fans with Daniel Alfredson. I know Alfie never played for the Leafs, but forever, no matter where he was and what he does, when he comes back with the Ottawa Senators in a management role, if Melnick leaves, it'll be the same thing. He'll always be booed when he goes into the Scotiabank Arena. I think John Tavares will be on the same level with Isles fans for a long time. Let's work our way back here too. So the Toronto Maple Leafs are taking on the Isles this weekend. We'll talk about the Rangers in a moment. The Islanders, start the season on a long road trip, have a lot of things not really go their way, Arthur, and now it looks like they're trying to put the pieces back together, but they are so far behind right now. What do you see out of this team? And Lou Lamoriello, he's crafty, he makes moves, he does different things when he feels the team is in a position to do well. This team does not seem to be in that position this year, behind the 8 ball from the get-go. Do you see him making moves at the deadline to, bolster picks and things like that? Or is he still in the belief mode that this team can climb their way out of it?
I don't know that they can climb the way out of it. And he's a realistic guy. Obviously, you don't last 4 decades without understanding, being able to take the pulse of your team. And I don't know that they're going to be in the market for renting anybody. Maybe if they go on, rip off a 10 gamer or something and they can win, pile up a bunch of points for all these games they have in hand, then maybe you start talking about that. But, on the flip side, they're not really a team that's built to sell and kind of retool on the fly. They don't have a lot of, assets that anybody really wants. They're pending UFAs or guys like Zdeno Chara and Zach Parise, who haven't really performed in their first years here, or Andy Green, who's maybe a guy that someone might want as a 6th or 7th defenseman on the way to the playoffs, as the Islanders did with him when they got him a couple of years ago. Maybe Semyon Varlamov has got a year left. But I think the Islanders, being in such a win now mode, they're up using LTIR. They're just right up against the cap. They've got some money coming off the books after this season, but not a ton, and they've got to make some decisions. Noah Dobson needs a new contract, his 2nd deal, and he's having a pretty good season. The year after next, Matthew Barzal is up, and he's going to, that's going to be an 8-figure number for sure if he's going to stay. So, they've got some considerations cap-wise, and I think, Lou is going to be 80 years old in October. He's not waiting around for anything, for any sort of rebuild or being patient or hoping that the kids, do some good stuff and maybe they'll be kind of plucky and move along here. They want to win. They were close. They were a 1-goal game in Game 7 away from getting to the finals and probably beating the Canadiens to win a Stanley Cup. The year before, maybe when they were a bit of a surprise in the bubble, they were 2 games away in an overtime loss against Tampa. They feel like they have measured up against the best team in the league the last 2 years and gone toe-to-toe with them and given them the best fight of any team that gave them in the playoffs these last couple of years on Tampa's way to the back-to-back cups. So I don't think they feel like they're going to, be in a situation, even if they're out of it at the deadline, to start selling off parts and really, reconsidering what path that they're on. They've made their decisions. They've got a lot of guys locked up for a lot of years who are, on the wrong side of 30. They do have a few good young guys. So I think if there's a trade out there that makes sense for them, I've talked a lot on a couple podcasts and on, in some of my last few Islanders articles about Jacob Chychrun, who's going to be a hot commodity, it seems. And, I think the one place where the Islanders may have made a few missteps was in their top 4 on the left side on D. 2 summers ago, it was trading Devon Taves when they were in a bit of a cap crunch to Colorado. And now he's a guy who's going to get Norris Trophy votes, even though he's not going to win because his D partner, Cale Makar, probably is. But Taves is a really dynamic defenseman. Nick Leddy they still had, and then they traded him this past offseason, thinking that they would be able to replace him with somebody a little bit cheaper and a little bit younger, and it just didn't happen. And they ended up signing Chara, and they've got Andy Green, and it hasn't worked out. So Chychrun really is a guy who would fill that yawning need that they have for another skilled guy in the top 4. He's young, cost controlled for a few more years. They don't have a ton of assets to give up, but that hasn't really stopped Lou. He seems, last 2 trade deadlines, he's been happy to give up his 1st-round pick for guys that they feel fit in. So I can't imagine why he'd be hesitant to do it again, especially for a guy that you can add to your top 4 that's already got Adam Pelech, who's going to be an all-star this year and is one of the best shutdown guys in the league. Ryan Pulock, who's been out injured, but is a valuable guy for them. And like I said, Dobson, who's really come on this year in his 3rd year to be a pretty dynamic top 4 defenseman. So if you can have those top 4, all guys under the age of 27, all for about $20 million next year, I can't see why the Islanders wouldn't want to do that. I'm sure they'll have some competition, but that's the kind of move I think you'd see Lou make rather than going out and renting a Ben Sherratt or a Travis Dermott, guys that are available who are going to be unrestricted free agents who don't really move the needle very much. So we'll see if they go on a huge run here in the next month or so. Maybe that changes things. But like you said, the top 8 in the East is pretty well set right now. That's kind of run away from the pack. So it would take a pretty miraculous run by the Islanders to get back in it this year.
I think one of the guys that has more value for them than people are estimating is Chara. Is that on the table, or is he kind of staying there till the end of the year? It's his potentially last year of his career, and he just wants to stay put. Or could we see him maybe be moved to a contender because he wants one last cup?
I think we'll see in the next couple of months. That's probably not a decision that needs to be made yet. He's a guy who, it was a neat story coming back full circle to the place where he started back in the fish sticks days when this franchise was pretty bereft, and 25 years later he comes back as a champion, a sure first ballot Hall of Famer, and his last shot at a title, he wants to do it on Long Island, and obviously hasn't worked out. But I'm sure that Lou, he has like everybody does, has the utmost respect for Zdeno Chara, even if it hasn't been a great season for him. I'm sure they'd give him the option if they wanted to, they were going to move him. It probably doesn't get them many assets or anything, and I'm sure it's the same with Parise. But yeah, I'm sure that if they're out of it by the deadline, and it looks pretty certain that they're out of it, I'm sure that they would give those guys the option if they wanted to go, to see if they could find another spot for him.
Yeah, it just seems like the type of guy that a certain team in Edmonton would overpay for to maybe try and bring it up a little bit, but I'm not sure.
I see Zdeno Chara going back to Boston. If the Islanders
maybe.
I think that's the only other team he'd go to is the Boston Bruins. I know it didn't end favorably before he went to Washington, but I think he'd definitely go back there and go for one more push.
Give me him back on the Sens. I want him back on the Sens for some reason. I know it's probably not possible, but that'd be fun.
Yeah, you talk about the Islanders needing some runway. I think the Sens need even more. So that isn't going to happen for him.
Sens aren't fully out of it yet.
Yeah, well, nobody is at the moment, but mathematically, but realistically, you look at it. So Saturday night, obviously, it's going to be a great game. The Islanders and the Maple Leafs, John Tavares coming back. The whole storyline. What do the Leafs need to do to be able to beat the New York Islanders? Obviously, when the fans get on a team, it becomes a completely different atmosphere. The Leafs have been able to fare it before, but right now you look at some of the games the Leafs have been playing, they've been blowing leads, they haven't been consistent. So going into a barn like that where it's going to be hostile, it's going to be problematic, it could be an issue for the Leafs. What do they need to do to stay calm, cool, and collective against a team that's probably going to try to hit them through the wall?
Yeah, I think the one saving grace for the Leafs is that when they've been able to get a lead, if they can get a lead on the Islanders just haven't shown that kind of bounce back ability yet this season. And certainly since they had their 11-game winless streak, obviously they were missing a lot of guys due to COVID. And that was back in the 10-day quarantine period. It's really been a lot of bad fortune and bad timing for them. They just really haven't found their mojo offensively, in these last couple of weeks when they started to stabilize themselves. It's really been against, Jersey, they've beaten a couple of times. Philly, they beat last night. They're playing them again tonight. Really the one difficult game, I guess you could say, was against Washington, and they didn't generate a whole lot there. They were down 1-0, and they just didn't show that kind of spark that they have to get timely goals, get themselves back in it, show that they can open up their offense a little bit when they need to, like they've done in the last couple of years. When they're not an offensively gifted team, but they get goals when they really need to, and they certainly do that in the playoffs. So I think if the Leafs are able to get out 1 or 2 on them, that's a much bigger challenge for them to come back than some other teams that have rallied on the Leafs that have maybe a little bit more offensive. More offensively dynamic team, say like Colorado. So, I think the Islanders' problems this season have been mostly in their own end. They're still a team that doesn't care if they win 1-0 or 3-2 or 5-4 if it comes to that. But when they fall behind, kind of the pattern over the last couple of years is that they're definitely not the sort of team that can break free from their structure to to kind of play a high risk, high reward game and get back into a track meet. So the Leafs certainly have better high end skill, and I think that's probably a place where if they jump on them early, the Islanders really haven't had that bounce back ability this season.
One player I want to ask you about for the New York Islanders, that Lou was tied to, and a lot of teams were, and I guess before the shoulder documents came out, or whatever you want to say, was Vladimir Tarasenko, which would be a guy that would give them an offensive punch. Wondering for you, do you see that being revisited? You look at this season, you talk about them not being able to kind of run and gun and score some goals. That is a guy that, yes, his production's dipped a little bit, but I definitely think he could be a guy that could put some pucks in the net for the Islanders. Do you see Lou maybe going after him and bringing in a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko, where he was interested, obviously, in Panarin and then shifted his focus there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some talks back and forth quite a bit, last offseason about Tarasenko. I'm sure that there was some question, like you said, about the shoulder and the bad blood between Tarasenko and the Blues and the medical staff and how that all went down. So obviously you'd be hesitant to give up any real assets to get a guy like that, but he's certainly shown that he's healthy and can still score in bunches and has really been a big help to the Blues this season, and would be a big help to the Islanders. I think the decision they made to leave Jordan Eberle unprotected in the expansion draft and have him go, a guy who maybe hadn't performed up to expectation after he came here from Edmonton, but I think maybe the Islanders underestimated his value to Matthew Barzal and just kind of rounding out that top line with Anders Lee on the other side. Kind of the trade-off they made was letting Eberle go and signing Kyle Palmieri. Palmieri just doesn't seem to be a fit with Barzal. He's much more of a bull in a china shop type of guy who scores some greasy goals. He's only got one goal so far this season. He's healthy now, and he hasn't been able to get back into the lineup, which, as I said, they're not an offensive dynamo. So if you've got your $5 million a year right wing with one goal and he can't crack a lineup that they've got where they're only scoring 2 or 3 a night, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, I think the chemistry thing with Barzal, is a big deal. And I wonder about what they'd be considering either through the end of this season or into the summer about trying to rectify that. And, it could even go as far as if they move enough money around, maybe they bring Eberle back from Seattle. Who knows what
Sure
that
enough.
situation is like. That you kind of right or wrong there and figure out it's going to cost them something, obviously. But so, Tarasenko is certainly a guy that could help. There's going to be some guys that maybe hit free agency. Philip Forsberg, they might have some options, but I think, to my mind, with their limited cap space and the way that they're built, which is from the goal and from their own zone on out, I don't know that they're going to want to address offensive deficiencies before they address defensive deficiencies. So it's going to be interesting to see if they don't make a Chikrin type trade before the trade deadline, when they go into the offseason, where Lamoriello decides to kind of plug the holes if it continues the way it's been continuing.
No, definitely. Well, before we shift focus to the New York Rangers, there's a little bit of a back and forth that's going on online right now. It was the video between Leon Draisaitl and Matheson. They're talking. It got a little bit chippy, to say.
No, it got a little bit pissy.
Yes, exactly.
I want to ask you, I just want to get your opinion on it. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But for you, in that situation, you look at the player. Obviously, everyone on Edmonton's frustrated. You look at Connor McDavid. You look at Leon Draisaitl. It doesn't matter. No one's really happy there right now with the way things are going. Everybody thought it was going to be a great season. They started off well, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the way the question was posed to Leon Draisaitl was the best, given the way the team is set up right now? Or was it posed the right way because it drew a response that has everybody talking not only about the Oilers, but about everything in general around Leon Draisaitl and the way we handle things, and are we too sensitive and so forth? I wonder, for you, would that be something A, you would do, and B, what do you think of the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, and I don't know how well I can compose them because they get pretty deep in the inside baseball part of being a hockey writer, which I've done for 20 years now, and I think the main thing that maybe people who don't do this for a living, the only thing that I would say that people need to understand is that doing this job over Zoom or always in a press conference setting takes away any nuance or any context of any situation like that. Like Jim Matheson has been doing this job since I was in grade school, and he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. He's been a great reporter. He covered some amazing teams out there. He's got good relationships with people, and I'm sure if the locker rooms were open, that's not a conversation that happens out in public in front of the cameras and everybody. I don't know what kind of guy Leon Draisaitl is. I've never really dealt with him. I've heard he can be a little bit prickly, a little bit short. There's definitely guys that I've had experiences with in the last couple of years who are great to talk to sitting next to them in the locker room or standing one-on-one in a locker room, who look like they've got ants in their pants when they're sitting in a Zoom. They just can't do it. And they shut down, or they get a little bit short with people. And it may seem like, oh, this guy, he's pissed at all the writers. It's like, nope, he just hates Zoom, like a lot of us do. So, I think that's the place you need to start. Like I said, Maddie's been doing it a long time. He and Draisaitl have been together a long time. That's a situation where I'm sure for both of them, you'd rather have that conversation, even if it's a fight in private. I've had plenty of dust-ups with guys that I've covered, with coaches, whoever, over my many years. And the ability to be able to go face-to-face and shake hands and apologize and say, let's just let it go. We got to be around each other. When you can do that in a non-pandemic time, it really shortens the lifespan of these kind of things. And, I think for me personally, if I'm in that situation, I tend towards not pushing too much in a press conference setting. I'd much prefer, especially with a guy I have a relationship with, I'm not looking to stir things up with anybody. This could be something that's been brewing for a long time between the two of them. Who knows? And, I think the context part of it really matters, just because who knows what the questions were before that, whether Draisaitl answered them. My general feeling is too, even though he's a superstar, he doesn't need to be a guy that comes up with, great 4-sentence answers with deep insight. Some people just aren't built that way to answer those kinds of questions, or certainly not in a press conference setting. So, once you know that you've got a guy who's not great in that setting, you ask your questions, they give you a couple sentences, and you're done. And to me, there's no need to push it, because we're all going to be there day after day after day, and it's easy to get sick of one another. And certainly when you're been looking at a screen for 2 years, or sitting in a press conference with 20 other people, where you're used to being operating in kind of a one-on-one environment, face to face, more nuance, being able to explain yourself a little bit better rather than having a mic in your hands. There's a lot that goes into it. Like I said, I feel like I've touched on about 15 different possible topics, but generally speaking, I think it's the way, to me, it's like the way I treat my kids. If you don't embarrass me, I won't embarrass you in public. And that's kind of the feeling I have that I bring to work, is that as long as we're all respecting one another, you don't have to give me the greatest answers, but I ask the questions, you answer. If it gets more than that, then I hope we can have a private conversation and sort it out.
So that kind of brings me to my argument, because, and I'm sure none of us know the answer to this. Why did all of us, like, I'm watching this clip, and my buddy sent it to me, and he goes, watch this. You're halfway through, you're just gonna start laughing. I'm like, okay, it's a Leon Draisaitl press conference. Why will I start laughing? So he sent it to me. And then when Jim goes, why are you getting so pissy? I just started laughing. And my immediate thought was, why did he say that in a public press conference? This guy is a Hall of Fame reporter. Could he not have afterwards? I'm sure he has Edmonton's PR contact, been like, hey, can you just get me in contact with Leon? I just want to apologize or figure it out. It just seemed really weird, and something that has been building for a while. I know I saw the ones with, I think he did one with Nurse and one with, I forget the other player, where he kind of asked a similar questioning, and those players shut him down too. So maybe he was frustrated. I just thought it was really weird. And like the NHL, they're getting the NBA drama today, because I'm sure everybody saw what happened with Brad Marchand before the Bruins Hurricanes game, which is currently 5-1 Hurricanes after the first period. So, yeah, just an entertaining day overall in media. I'm sure we'll never get a clear answer as to what the heck happened here, but that was that was fun to see. And at the end of the day, they're both big boys. I'm sure they'll get over it when they wake up tomorrow morning.
That's the other thought too.
Yeah, that's the other part is, like I said, Matty's been doing it a long time. You do the same job for a long time, day in, day out. Who knows what you're bringing to the table that day, whether you're the reporter or the player
Yeah.
or whoever. You don't want to be in that situation, but I feel like there's probably been times where I've been, stuck inside with my kids for a few months trying to keep them entertained. And if somebody said, you got to be on a Zoom now and ask some questions, boy, I'd probably have blown up too if somebody gave me a bad answer. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
um, hopefully everybody just calms down and understands the situation, that the player is upset because his team is, like you said, not performing at all. The reporter is a guy that's used to getting good answers from people and being able to kind of work through the build the relationships to be able to get those kind of answers, and you can't do it now. So there's frustration everywhere, and it's just a shitty situation basically. And it comes to a head, and everybody has their fun on Twitter and gives their 2 cents, and by tomorrow we'll be on to something else. So maybe that's the best thing for it.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but when you have a bad day at work, the last thing you want to do is really have a long diatribe with anyone. You really just want to
Yeah.
keep yourself and get it done. So, and if somebody asks you something off kilter, you're just like, no, you pretty much snap, like you said. So we've all had those days. You know what? You come to the office, it's not a great day. It is what it is. You move forward. But hey, it's good to see a little personality, a little snapback, other than the cookie cutter answers, because like you said, Zoom does give everyone the ability to kind of just shut it down and keep it pretty short, because you
Is
don't
that
get
why
the
we
nuances
switched
and
to
the playback.
StreamYard?
That's why we did StreamYard, because now we're in the yard. We could talk and do more different things. But now let's move on. Obviously, we talk about the Leafs, the Islanders. I want to talk about the Rangers, a team that went and sent out a letter to their fans, let them know they were rebuilding, seemed to expedite the process. Oh, hi, Adam Fox. Hi, Artemi Panarin. Hey, the goalie factory behind Hendrik Lundqvist, who knew? Shesterkin, Gorgiev, you name it. These guys are doing well, and now they're I think they're still tops of their division as of right now. I'm not 100% sure. Go check. But what has happened with the New York Rangers to take them to that level where everybody thought they were still just kind of coming along, had some good pieces, had Adam Fox, Panarin, Shesterkin was coming along until Jeff Merrick ruined his year last year. Which is true. He came out and said, hey, he's going to win the Vezina, and we all know what happened there. So, and look at Carter Hart this year, just putting it out there. Stop naming goaltenders, Merrick. But you look at the New York Rangers. No one expected them to be where they are right now. Maybe they themselves they did, but guys like Kreider taking huge steps. For you now covering that team, what have you seen this season, and what are they bringing to the table that maybe the average person who's checking in on them every once in a while doesn't get to see?
I think people kind of underestimated the amount of change that they went through at the end of last season. Obviously the Panarin Tom Wilson situation seemed to precipitate some big changes. Jim Dolan, who's been the Garden chairman, who's always been very involved with the Knicks, but a little bit more hands off with the Rangers, got pretty involved. Fired John Davidson, fired Jeff Gorton, hired Chris Drury to fill both those roles. A first-time GM. And clearly the mandate was get tougher and get in the playoffs, and we're going to stop kind of messing around with this, like missing the playoffs, but still still piling up good young players. And Drury went in a very distinct direction with his offseason, traded Pavel Buchnevich, which wasn't a very popular move with the fans, brought in Sammy Blais, as just kind of an asset to bring back the other way. He had a pretty good season going as kind of a utility top 9 guy till he tore his ACL back in November. Brought in Ryan Reeves, and the big ticket guy was Barclay Goodrow, coming off of 2 Stanley Cups,
Yes.
A 6-year deal, 3.6 per, a big nut for a guy who only scored 8 goals, I think is a career high in 7 or 8 seasons in San Jose and Tampa. But both those guys, Goodrow and Reeves, kind of, the classic high character, good in the room guys. And I think the maturity level is the thing that people talk about on the team the most, that it's come up a lot since last year. They don't sag when they get pushed around a little bit, because they've got some guys that can push back. They don't sag when they give up a goal. They know they've got Shesterkin playing at an incredibly high level. Their D is a little bit more mature, even though it's a very young group. And they've got 3 or 4 guys that can hurt you up front. When you've got a top six that's got Kreider and Zibanejad on the first line and Stroman Panarin on the second line. They've always had the ability to hurt you since Panarin came here these last couple of years, but they haven't had the ability to follow that up with a third line that's going to come in and crash and bang and get some possession if they can, and then a fourth line with a guy like Reeves who's going to talk and hit and do a little bit more than you always think. He's a guy you just who seems like he's one dimensional but has a little bit more to his game. And then you've got some fill-in guys up front, guys like Kevin Rooney, who's had a pretty good year as a fourth liner. They've got Julien Gauthier, who seemed like a career AHLer, who's had some value. Dryden Hunt, same situation, a guy who's bounced around a little bit their lineup. And you've got Alexis Lafreniere, who has been mostly a third line guy, which you wouldn't have thought for a number one overall pick. You'd think he'd be out there playing like Jack Hughes 20 minutes a night and being a surefire top six guy. And I think that's where Gerard Gallant comes in. He's a guy who has the ability to bring a message to his team where he's a very intense, fiery guy, but it's very outwardly focused. When it's inwardly focused, he's very, he's a guy that's considered a player's coach. He wants the best for his guys. And Lafreniere maybe isn't in the ideal situation being on the third line most of the season, but I think he's trying to kind of build a complete player up as opposed to just letting a guy go wild. I think, covering the Islanders for so long and hearing from Barry Trotz, who's always got lots of coaching wisdom, he did very much the same thing with Matthew Barzal, where he's coming off a Calder Trophy, but an Islander team that was a disaster as a complete team his first year. Trotz came in. Barzal's production went way down, but I think the completeness of his game has gone up, and the success that they've had has gone up. Barzal is a 15 draft guy. McDavid, Eichel, he's comparing himself to these like generational players who have had no success at all in the playoffs. And I'm sure Matthew Barzal looks back now and says, well, I'd take 15 or 20 fewer points in the regular season as long as we can get to game 7 of the conference final. And I think Gallant and his staff and Drury and his staff look at the Ranger situation and say, we want Lafreniere to be that kind of player. He's a big body. He's a very skilled winger, but is he ready to be a 25-goal, 30-goal scorer that we put out there 20 minutes a night? Probably not. So I think that they're looking for a more complete team, and there have been stretches when they've gotten it. I think some of their metrics are kind of telling that they really relied heavily on Shesterkin and heavily on their power play and their penalty kill to be successful this year. And they've also just been eating up points against the bottom feeders. And then, it's going to come back at some point. Obviously, the Leafs are not a bottom feeder. Then they go to Carolina 2 days later. So this week is going to be a real test for them. And they've been about a little bit less than a 500 team against some of the more elite teams in the league. But points are points, and you just got to get in. And after basically 5 years out, throw out that sweep that they had at the hands of Carolina in the bubble, which really wasn't even a playoff series, that kind of play-in round or whatever you call it. This is a team that's been missing in action from the playoffs from all the success they had in the 2010s. They want to get back there. There's still a couple guys left from that last playoff series they had. And the fans certainly want to be able to see some playoff games and see this team return to kind of they didn't win it all, but they certainly got close enough year after year with Henrik Lundqvist and some of those guys that were very defense oriented. So I think that's kind of the model that they're looking at. Whether they can stand up to the Carolinas or the Torontos or the Floridas of the world, that remains to be seen. That's still a process. But I think the maturity level of this group has taken a big step forward, and it's resulted in being where they are right now.
Well, you talk about the goaltending for the New York Rangers, and that's a problem for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've been Shesterkin so many times, or Georgiev for that matter. Both of them really step up to the plate when it's the Toronto Maple Leafs and shut them down. That is the big scary factor for me. The Leafs will be without Jake Muzzin coming into MSG, but when you're facing Shesterkin, for whatever reason, he puts on a clinic against the Leafs. They can't beat him, and I don't care what anybody says. Let's get between your ears. And if you're a goal scorer like Austin Matthews or Johnny T or even Mitch Marner when he's ripping off shots like he did the other night there, it really gets between your ears, and it's a problem. I think they really need to get in Shesterkin's kitchen, really make it messy, get a couple banging goals, get a Spezza type in the tip, whatever it needs to be, to beat him a couple times to get that feeling. Because I think once he gets in a rhythm against the Leafs, you can see the Leafs kind of shrink back, and it's like, we're not going to beat this guy. And then the Rangers go feed off of it. I wonder, do you see the same kind of thing when the Leafs go in to MSG? If they're able to get a couple like you talked about against the Islanders, they're okay. But as soon as the shot tally starts to build up and the goaltender's in a rhythm and it's just Shesterkin in net, it's not happening. Or for that matter, a rookie goaltender that comes out of nowhere, like against the Arizona Coyotes, they can run up as many shots as they want. They're just not scoring.
I don't even remember that guy's name.
Me neither, but I should say that much.
Like, no disrespect, but that it was an outstanding goaltender performance. But if you give me a multiple choice question, there's a 75% chance I'm getting it wrong because I genuinely do not know.
Shesterkin is, I mean, he's done that to a lot of teams this year. I think that's, it's not even a case of don't let this guy get in the rhythm. He is, it does seem like right now you look at kind of the goalie metrics and it's Shesterkin 1, Campbell's right in there 2 or 3. I really feel like it is amazing. I'm sure that there's some fans out there, whether it's Philly or Edmonton, who look at the Rangers who have basically had 3 decades of uninterrupted, incredible goaltending from Mike Richter with a couple of years in between, maybe 1 or 2 but down years right before the lockout to Lundqvist and now to this guy. And not exactly like
embarrassment of riches.
And not exactly first round picks either. Not guys that were highly touted. They've, it's a huge credit to their scouting staff, especially the European scouting staff. Nick Bobrov, who's no longer with the team, was the guy that really discovered Shesterkin and pushed them to draft him. Benny Allaire, who was Lundqvist's guru for so long, is the guy that's still been there now, going on 20 years. It's a real credit to them that you don't associate certain organizations with that kind of situation so much anymore, but the Rangers really, finding these guys and developing them and putting them in a situation to succeed is impressive. And just the way that he's played this year, it's not super flashy. It's not acrobatics. It's not anything. He's just a very, very technically sound, very skillful goalie. He doesn't beat himself really. I'm sure that low danger goals for him, it's maybe been 1 or 2 this entire year. And he, on the penalty kill, he's up around .950 save percentage on the penalty kill. It's pretty ridiculous numbers. I think early in the year he was really stealing a lot more games where teams were peppering him with shots and chances. And that overtime win that the Rangers had up in Toronto, I think, was kind of the apex of that, where he not only diving out of his crease to make and then diving back in to stop a play. It's I guess he's got a little Hasek in him when he needs it, but for the most part he's very much in control, and I think that helps with their defensive zone, because that's really been the place they've been struggling a lot over the last couple of years is coverages. I'm just not sure that the message was right for them when David Quinn was the coach, and now with Gallant, a little bit simpler, like I said, a little bit more mature. You've obviously got Adam Fox, who's a Norris Trophy candidate again this year.
Yeah.
But you've got Jacob Trouba, who seems a lot more comfortable and a lot more physical now in the defensive zone. Keandre Miller is a year older.
Yes.
He's still only 21, and he's such an incredibly raw, skilled guy that is the mental side of his game is rounding into form. And they just called up another young guy in Braden Schneider, who's probably going to play tomorrow, who's kind of manning that right side on the third pair. This is where the assets that they've built up built up, you want to have these options to be able to plug in when things don't look so good. And I see you guys kind of shaking your heads because the Leafs don't really have that. They have to go out and kind of find guys to fill in the margins. Well, this is the luxury of when the Rangers get off to this kind of start. You have a little bit of a cushion to work in a Braden Schneider, to work in a Nils Lundqvist, to let Keandre Miller work through his mistakes, because you've got this all-world goalie behind him, and you've got all-world scorers that can make up for some deficiencies, and you've got a huge cushion, 10 or 12 points between them and the playoff cut line. So there's a lot going in the Rangers' favor right now this season, and I think that confidence also spills over, not just from Shesterkin making great saves, but their ability to stay calm and be calm in any situation, because they know that they can work through it.
Well, let's ask you the $1 million question from the outside looking in for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We are all still hanging on the fact that this team has not got past the first round. I beat the drum a little bit different this year, Arthur, by saying this team does look different. The buy-in is different for certain things. You got guys that are willing to block shots like Andre Kasha, Michael Bunting. You go down the list. David Kampf is a great third-line defensive center, something they haven't had. They have guys that are understanding certain roles on this team, like the Spetzes. Simmons kind of settled into what he needs to be. The defense still isn't 100% there. Jack Campbell is exactly what everybody said he was going to be. But from the outside looking in, do you see a difference in this team this year than what was last year and the year before, where they've had great regular season success, but they just haven't put it together in the playoffs? I say this team will do better, but I mean, I got the honeymoon glasses on with all these great players that have come in. Michael Bunting doing well on the first line. You get excited for your team. Am I wrong to be excited about this iteration of the Toronto Maple Leafs?
I mean, they're an exciting team, and I think that the credit to Kyle Dubas in being able to, such a limited amount of cap space and a limited asset pool that they have of their own, to be able to go out and find the Kashas and the Buntings, on the cheap, guys that can bring good value, whether it's their analytics department that's driving it, whether it's their scouting department that's driving it. I'm sure it's a combination of both. To find the Mikheyevs of the world. I know that he's a guy that's been injured a lot, but certainly produces when he's in there. That's impressive. And the Campbell situation, I think, is if they are able to win a round or two, it's going to be mostly because they have some better goaltending than they've had. No disrespect to Freddie Anderson, but just the fact that their best players have very clearly taken a step back in the playoffs each of these last few years, and maybe Matthews hasn't, maybe Tavares hasn't at all times because his assignment has been a little different when they play the Bruins. But the guys on the margins can only take you so far. You need your the old cliche of your best guys got to be your best guys, and I think with Campbell in there, maybe that gives them a boost because he's been so consistently good, and now we're back to at least playing a fuller season, quote unquote, a little bit more normal than it's been. Maybe that helps kind of. You got a longer runway going to the playoffs. It's not quite as condensed, and then you're right into it, or you're not in the bubble the way that we were a couple of years ago. So that situation maybe helps them a little bit, and certainly, the between the years part, it would certainly help to see somebody other than the Bruins in the first round, even if it's a Florida team that seems to be unstoppable right now. Or the two-time defending Stanley Cup champs. I think just being able to look and see some different jerseys the minute you start the playoffs would be a big plus for them. And but ultimately, I think it's hard to judge right now. They're a very good team, but I think the rubber hits the road in the playoffs, and that's when you got to have this is probably a make or break year for them in terms of their entire organization about keeping the core together. Mitch Marner's got to have a good playoff. Austin Matthews has got to take his game up a notch if that's possible because he's such a good player. Tavares, he may get heavier assignments, but he's still got to carry the load at both ends of the ice. And Campbell's got to be really good and not give, you can't have any leaky goals in any of those first round games because it can turn pretty quickly, as they've obviously seen before, time and time again. So I do wonder if the bad thing happens that has happened the last few years, whether we're looking at wholesale changes, whether it's going to be a new front office or new coaching staff or both. So maybe the urgency is there too from the top down to say, we can't do this again, and then try to run it back and fill out the 100-piece puzzle with some guys making under $1 million again, and run it back with the same core. So, maybe that sense of urgency has gotten in, and you want to see, like I was talking about with the Rangers, like I think we've seen with the Islanders since Tavares left, it's a maturity. It's an ability to not get rattled by whatever happens. We live in a pretty strange world these days. So who knows what's going to be happening in May when the playoffs start. You got to be prepared for anything. And I think that's going to be the real test of that group up there as far as their maturity, whether they're worth keeping together. And whether a guy like Mitch Marner is a money player. That's when you got to bring it. And if it's Tampa, it's going to be tough. That team that knows how to win no matter what the situation is. If it's Boston or if it's Florida, if it's Boston again, you got to learn how to finally get past those guys that they know how to beat you. And if it's Florida, it could be a situation where it's a 115-point team that's just been steamrolling everybody. So every situation is going to bring its challenges, and I think it's going to be a real test. I know from the outside we all say, "Gee, it'd be really interesting to see," and that's not what Leafs fans want to hear. They don't want to hear interesting. They want to hear, "Are we going to finally win this thing?"
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. When they're on and they're the center of the hockey world, whether it's people are loving to watch them or hate watching them, it makes for great theater. So I'm eager to see how they do when May comes around.
I don't like any of those matchups because all the narratives suck. Like you play Tampa.
Well, there's
you're
not
playing...
many other options right now. You think
I
Detroit's
know,
going to sneak in?
I want to somehow play a Metro team, but then
I guess that could happen. I guess
could.
You could win the division and then get that last spot, but that seems unlikely the way that.
I'm looking at all the options here. I look at Tampa, go 2-time defending Cup champs. Can the Leafs overcome that? Florida, I'll save that one for last because that's my favorite one. Boston, you're going against the team that's just owned you for the last decade. And they look at Florida, and you got the 2 longest playoff winning droughts in the NHL currently. The Leafs are obviously going to lose that one. Like if they play Florida in the first round, I'm betting the house on Florida because the Leafs are cursed, man. If they lose in the first round this year, I would be fully on the boat of moving them down the road to the first Ontario Center in Hamilton for 1 year just to break the curse. Like my therapist is going to make a lot of money if they lose in the first round this year.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but
no, it's at this point it's just funny. Like I remember watching Game 7 with my wife, and she goes, and the game ended. I just turned off the TV, and she goes, "What's up?" I said, "What do you want to watch?"
Yeah,
right. Like it's just,
well, at that point it was just so heartbreaking. I mean, last year it wasn't a gift, but at the same time it was their best chance to go on a run and do something with the team they had, and it didn't happen. John Tavares getting hurt obviously didn't help, but I mean, you need to overcome things in the playoffs. It's the playoffs for a reason. It's a long grind, right? So you need the next up mentality, but the Leafs need to have that this year. That's why I'm excited for this team because they seem to have enough pieces in place to be able to do some of those things. I think they need one more guy, Braden McNabb, on the back end, and if they add a guy like that, some sandpaper, some minute eating, I think they might be all right. But Arthur, I want to thank you very much for taking the time tonight, sitting down with us, talking about the Islanders, the Rangers, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Hopefully get you back on towards the playoffs. Hopefully the Isles are in the mix and the Rangers are still atop their division, and we have something fun to talk about.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Arthur. Thank you for your time.
All right, everybody. This is Offside Hockey Talk, where hockey comes to talk. Stick around. We'll be going live yet again, talking about the PHF announcement. Of course, we'll be back in just a little bit.